Hello, friends. Hope everything is fine and welcome to the second day of the New York Decameron. Everything is kind of quiet and slowly lazy here in New York today. As you can see, from outside, the skies are kind of gray, but let me show you part of the view from the window. You see? That's the military ship that's docked. And this is a view of Midtown. You see the Empire State Building and the remaining part. So, we're here very, very lucky to be here. We have a wonderful, wonderful view of the city. I just went up this morning walking my dog around 8 a.m. My dog is a 3-year-old, more than 100-pound heavy Bernese mountain dog. Her name is Hope. She was born in Rome, Italy, and she flew to New York 2 months after we settled down. All we needed was, an apartment which was pet friendly and had enough space. By the time we also had another dog, Amy, who was a 10-year-old Labrador who we rescued, and unfortunately she passed away last June, and it was a very, very sad story because we would have loved her to be with us for a longer time. But we really hope that the 4 years she spent with us were really the best years of her life. Okay, so what are we talking about today? We're talking about the New York Decameron, the second day, and the topic of the second day, according to Boccaccio, was stories that started in such a not so great way, but ended up being awesome. The interesting thing is that the second day of the Decameron in Boccaccio's novel actually took place on a Thursday. And the third day, odd enough, fell on a Sunday because according to the time's fashion and rules, on Friday and Saturday you were not supposed to tell stories. But anyway, here's my choice for the story that started not so great and ended up being awesome. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. And most of all, keep all your senses open because today I want to engage all of you in a multi-sensorial experience. Just imagine this. It is a still of the night. It's June 21st, 1871. It's the longest day of the year, the day where the sunlight is the longest in the day in this part of the earth, on this hemisphere. And there is a boat that's anchored in the middle of the New York harbor. It reached New York way too late, so it could not dock, and it had to station overnight before docking the following day. There are a lot of people in there, but there is one passenger that is particularly important for American history. He's about 37 years old. Actually, no, he's 40. I'm sorry, he's 41. He's 40 years old. But anyway, just imagine this. The boat is anchored in the middle of the New York harbor. It's the still of the night. And this man is putting his hand on a rail and is starting to climb the steps of the boat. He wants to reach the very upper deck. So you can feel, his hand gripping the rail. You can hear the sound of his footsteps on the wooden steps. Maybe you could also smell, the sea or the wood. And as soon as this man reaches the deck, he takes a look around. It's a very bright night. The moon is kind of full. There is a lot of light. And he takes a look around at a magnificent, all-natural, 3.5-mile New York harbor. is counting the islands and is thinking about his project. He was sent to America from France to talk to some of the most important American people, to convince them of a project that had been developed in the previous years. Hello, Caroline. Ça va? So here's the thing. It all dated back to the late summer of 1865, late August 1865. The scene is a very small village in the north of France. Its name is Glavigny. It's not very far away from Versailles, where the kings of France spent their summer months during their kingdoms. And a guy whose name is Edouard René de la Boulaye is throwing a dinner party. Why? Because he wants to celebrate. He wants to celebrate the end of the Civil War and the abolition of slavery in the United States. So he calls a lot of friends of his, a lot of French liberals, a lot of people very fond of the United States, and they want to celebrate. So you may think that the mood that night was indeed a very bright one, except that it was not. The mood was kind of... it sucked. Because the French knew one thing. This time, their country really blew it. Just imagine this. The previous century, during the War of Independence, Marquis de Lafayette and other brave Frenchmen fought alongside George Washington for the independence of the colonies. But this time, with the Civil War, what happened in France? The then Emperor Napoleon III, probably, who knows, in an attempt to regain the only colony they had in the United States, which they lost in 1803, and the colony was, of course, Louisiana, named after Louis the King. He sent troops to the Southern Confederation. He sent troops to the people who supported slavery. So just imagine how this thing really annoyed, not even say, probably it pissed off all these French liberals. So, you know, they were happy, of course, that the war had finally ended, that the Northern Confederation had won, that slavery was abolished with the 13th Amendment of the American Constitution, but yet they had this thing in mind. Oh boy, France as a country really blew it this time. How can we remind the Americans that despite this mistake, we are still their best friends? So they started thinking about it. The first to our mind was if actually, as a philosophical concept, friendship was a possible thing among countries. Because, you know, friendship is possible among people, but among countries. Can a country be friend to another country? They started wondering if that was possible. They came to a conclusion, considering the relationship between France and Italy. Both of them had armies whose power was more or less the same. So in case of a war, nobody would have really prevailed. It would have been, you know, a mutual loss, so to speak. So in that case, these two countries acted as friends because they knew what they were going through. So they came to the conclusion that yes, all things considered, friendship is possible between countries. So, let's say, how should we epitomize this concept? How can we create something that really expresses and perfectly synthesizes, epitomizes the friendship between France and the United States? Hey, Americans, we are your best friends. So they started, you know, talking about it. There was a series of discussions. That night, really, nothing serious came out. But at a certain point, somebody brought up a topic. Of course, the Civil War had come to an end. Slavery was abolished. But the man who had led the United States in such a time of crisis, was assassinated, murdered a few months before. Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. So they spent part of the night mourning the loss of such a great person. And at a certain point, somebody had an idea to send Lincoln's widow a gift from the French. And they decided that this gift should have taken the shape of a gold medal, where they wanted to remind the lady all the political and civil achievements reached by her assassinated husband. So all around that medal was an inscription, a weird one, that more or less sounded like this: for all the political and civil achievements reached by President Lincoln without veiling the Statue of Liberty. Well, you know what? Every time I think about this inscription, it never makes sense to me. But fortunately, history went a different way. And even more fortunately, there are people who have this magnificent talent of giving meaning to things that seem meaningless at first sight. And most of these people are artists. So attending that dinner that evening, besides, the grandson of Marquis de Lafayette and other notable people, was also a 34 years old sculptor who was born in Alsace, a very talented one, a very ambitious guy, wanted to leave his permanent mark in both the history of mankind and the history of art. And the name of this guy was, of course, Auguste Bartholdi. Well, a few years before, Bartholdi had really tried hard to leave his permanent mark in a history. As by a joint effort of many different countries, including, but not limited to, the United Kingdom and France, a passage on the sea had been opened, really a big opening, really literally, in human history. A small canal linking the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, close to the city of Suez in Egypt. The Suez Canal marked an important revolution. For the first time, the journey between London and Mumbai passed from being 10,000 miles long to 4,000, saving 2.5 months of sailing time, but mostly preventing the ships from running so many risks while sailing around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, whose waters have always been dangerous. For the opening of such a bright construction of human genius, Bartholdi had thought of something: building the tallest statue in the world. A lady dressed in a typical Egyptian costume, holding a torch on her left hand at the very entrance of the canal. The torch, of course, was meant to cast light to the Eastern world, to the entrance of the Eastern world between Europe and the Near East. Everybody loved this idea, but unfortunately, the Viceroy of Egypt did not have enough money. So he had to set the project aside. So a few years later, when people started to think about how to epitomize the friendship between France and the United States, Bartholdi jumped at the opportunity and said, how about we give them the tallest statue in the world? And okay, it's just a little bit of fiction, but just imagine what's happening. Bartholdi coming up with this thing, and most of the people right there say, hey, you cannot be serious. I mean, come on. We want to show the Americans that we are their best friends, and all you can come out with is just an old recycled idea. That's bad, my friend. And you think Bartholdi lost his cool? No way. He said, well, mon ami, mes amis, because it's more than one, mes amis. I don't know who told you that crap, but you know what? Yes, it's true, I had thought about it, but I already knew that the king of Egypt did not have money. So that project only stayed in my mind. I never really worked on that. Well, he sure did. Because if you come here to New York and you visit the Museum of the Statue of Liberty, you will realize that Bartholdi had worked a great deal on this project, making at least 90 different and very detailed sketches of that statue, and no less than 3 different clay models. And one of them, a few of them actually, a couple, can be found right there in the museum. Somehow, nobody seemed to be able to call Bartholdi's bluff. So they sent him to the United States. So he arrived in New York in the morning of June 21st, 1871, armed only of a couple of things: his own enthusiasm and a handful of introductory letters signed by René de la Boulaye to allow, Bartholdi to be presented to the very important people he was meant to meet. And indeed, he met very important people. The most important was actually a man who went by the name of Ulysses Grant. And by the time he was no longer General Grant, the guy that led the Northern Confederation to victory, no, was Ulysses Grant, the President of the United States. They did not meet in Washington. They met at Grant's summer estate in Connecticut. But however it goes, Grant loved the idea of the Statue of Liberty so much that he did something. He summoned the U.S. Congress and used them to vote a bill. This bill is actually quite an awkward one. It was an international resolution, probably the first modern international resolution in the history of modern politics. And what was it all about? In short, they came to the conclusion that the Statue of Liberty was, yes, the best way to epitomize the friendship between France and the United States, and hopefully that would have reached the United States by 1876 for the celebration of the centennial of the Declaration of Independence. And the obligations related to this big operation were equally split between the two countries, with France having to design the statue, to build it with everything it took for that, and the United States to build a pedestal for the statue to stand, as well as choosing the best location for that. This is the reason why we really can't say that the Statue of Liberty is actually a gift from the people of France to the United States. Even less a gift from France to the United States. You know why? Because a gift, it's something that has no strings attached. But if you really think about it, there were conditions at the basis of this entire operation. There were obligations that had to be duly fulfilled by every, distinct party. So you say, so why are still people talking about a gift? So why every time we get on the ferry from Battery Park to the Statue of Liberty, we hear that damn speaker say, the statue was a gift from the people of France to the United States? Yeah. Have you ever heard of a thing called politics or public relations? It was only after the end of World War I that the United States became the very big and powerful country we know today. Prior to that, they were an important country, of course, but whose power and prestige was no match for countries like France, Germany, or the United Kingdom. So think about it. How powerful a message do you think it would have been for fellow Americans? Hey, we're becoming so important that even France, probably the most important country in the world, has decided to give us a gift, the tallest statue in the world, to celebrate our own ideas. Because this statue is a very interesting one. First of all, its name, it's not technically the Statue of Liberty. It is called Liberty Enlightening the World. It is a monument that celebrates freedom, that celebrates the end of slavery, but also celebrates the moment citizens of the United Kingdom, coming from 13 different colonies here in the New World, started to think of themselves as something different than British people. In fact, not only was the Statue of Liberty supposed to be completed for the International World Exhibition in Philadelphia in 1876 to celebrate the centennial of the Declaration of Independence. Originally, the statue was supposed to hold broken chains on the left hand as a symbol of the end of slavery. Unfortunately, the structure for a statue holding these pieces of chain hanging down from a hand proved to be a little too difficult. So Bartholdi changed this project into a lady holding a tablet with a date engraved, and of course the date is the 4th of July, 1776. If you really think about the Declaration of Independence, you will notice one thing. It is the first time, many years before the United States were actually formally established as a country, that the people who wrote and signed it thought of themselves no longer as British citizens, but as the people of the United States. So the country did not legally exist, but something in her mind had already shifted. On the other hand, Bartholdi did not lose his cool or his original ideas, because the Statue of Liberty actually features broken chains. She actually steps on those broken chains to further reinforce the message of the end of slavery. So here is this lady, modern reproduction of a Roman goddess, Libertas, the goddess of freedom. Libertas is actually the Latin word for freedom. Liberté, libertad, libertage, libertà. They all come from libertas, the Latin word. So, here it is. The goddess of liberty, with her torch to light the darkness, to outline the primate of knowledge and wisdom over ignorance, freedom over slavery, something like that. And also, if you look at the Statue of Liberty, you will notice that contrary to what people normally think about every time they picture the Statue of Liberty in their head, she's in a very powerful stance, holding a torch, marking really the entrance to a new world. So you may imagine that she's really fierce in a very firm and standing position. But if you take a look at her right foot, she's not standing. No, she's doing something else. Every time I ask the people I meet there, what is she doing? Everybody says, she's kneeling. But you know what? It's too Catholic. No, she's not kneeling. She's just about to take a step. And every time somebody takes a step, they are projecting themselves into the future. So let's connect the dots. The goddess of freedom, with a light, to light the darkness, is walking and stepping on broken chains. Long story short, the Statue of Liberty is a wish for a world made out of freedom, finally void of slavery and all the other things which one way or the other limit human liberty. That is the real message of liberty enlightening the world. There is also another speculation that she's wearing a cap, with 7 different spikes. And these spikes, although it seems that the first time such a thing came out was in the 1930s, according to Barry Moran and other people, these 7 spikes seem to stand for the 7 continents and the 7 seas, so for the entire world. So the statue is a world symbol of peace, donated to the entire world by the French and the American people. So once Bartholdi got his own approval, went back to France, and they started to work on the statue. The building of the statue took a long time, from late 1881 to the final completion day, which occurred, ironically, on July the 4th, 1884. By the time the statue was completed, she was the tallest building in Paris. Everybody could see part of her right arm or part of her crown, and everybody wanted to see her, to see the modern wonder of the world. So Bartholdi had a very bright idea, charging an admission fee to all the people approaching his workshop. And it proved to be a very genius thing, because that way Bartholdi had enough money at the beginning of the following year to disassemble the statue, disassemble the frame that was holding the statue, which was designed by a very other famous Frenchman, Gustave Eiffel, who was soon to become famous for another monument in Paris. And of course, you know what I'm talking about. And disassembling everything, putting the statue into 230 wooden boxes, renting a boat, Lazarus, which docked at Le Havre, shipping all the things to Le Havre, loading the boat, and finally sending the boat to New York. This is where trouble began. First of all, it took quite some time for the ship to reach New York. At a certain point, it almost ran out of fuel. They had to make a urgent stop at the Azores to get all the coal that was necessary for that. But when it reached New York, the sea was so stormy that the boat waited for 2 or 3 days before passing the Narrows. And the sea was so rolling that the boat almost sank twice. And finally, when it entered the Narrows, in the morning of June 19, 1885, they headed to the chosen place, Bedloe Island, from 1956, officially named Liberty Island. And you know, the French thought, okay, we've done our part, so let's go to Bedloe Island, we will find the pedestal, and we will start to assemble the statue. Big problem. There was no pedestal. The Americans had not collected the money to build the pedestal. The initial estimate was $250,000, and not much money, if any, had been gathered. So they started trying with a few campaigns, but almost all of them did not turn out to be very good. At a certain point, between 1883 and 1884, they also set an auction of original works of art, whose proceedings would have gone for the funding of the pedestal, and we will be back on this in a very few minutes. But the man who was responsible for the building of the pedestal was a man who was born in Bulgaria, who came to America at the age of 21 from Boston, who became a journalist and ended up having his own newspaper. The name of the newspaper was the New York World, later to be named the World, and the person's name was Joseph Pulitzer. Some of you may know him because of the Pulitzer Prize. And one day, in his own newspaper, he wrote an editorial addressing all the American people, saying, oh, it really seems that Americans really don't like the idea of the Statue of Liberty. And I really wonder why. Somehow, he said, I understand the rich people. You know, rich people have everything. They have money. They couldn't care less about actual freedom. But how about the other people? The people who, like me, a long time ago, came here to America looking for the second chance in life. It's you addressing those people, he said, who should donate. And so he encouraged these people to donate. But he knew, of course, these people thought that they really thought they could not afford it. And he needed an incentive. Listen to this, because this is pure genius. He wrote something like that. You know what? Donate according to your possibilities. I know you may think you really can't afford it, but what it really matters is the act of donating itself rather than the amount. And what I promise on my side is, listen carefully. Whoever is going to donate, I will write their names in the first page of my newspaper. Pure genius. You know, it's human weakness. Everybody loves to be famous one way or the other. Today we have social media. By the time there were no social media. So, having your name published in the first page of a big newspaper was the best thing you could aim for. That way, in a mere 4 months, in 1885, through almost $500,000, Joseph Pulitzer was able to collect $100,000. The World came out in his August 11th, 1885 issue saying, we gathered $100,000. And he kept faith to his promise. Whoever sent him money, he wrote their names, where they were sending money from, and never ever mentioning how much money people were donating. So everybody was alike. We may say that as a side effect, he also sold 500,000 more copies of his newspaper, but you know, that's collateral damages, so to speak. The remaining part of the money came from other campaigns, including that auction we talked about, and $30,000 were paid by the US Congress under the conditions that the statue should have become a lighthouse. But there will be more about it. And if you're interested in the story, just write in the comments that I will add it to that. I don't want it to be very, very long today, you know, because this story is amazing, especially what is going to come right now. The auction we were talking about. That night, the most famous piece of art sold at that auction was, I just said that, a poem. That poem was written by a lady, Emma Lazarus. She was very well known in New York. She was the daughter of a very rich merchant. She had Jewish origins. She was a poet, a novelist, and an activist for the rights of the weak. She became famous to the big New York crowd one day as she took a firm position against the New York administration when a group of Jews from Lithuania were not admitted in the United States. These people were really, really coming to America because they were afraid for their lives. You surely heard about the pogroms, the massive slaughtering of the Jews in the Russian Empire, and they were living from that land. And they were not admitted here. So Lazarus remembered her own origins and aroused so much disdain in public opinion that somehow the administration backed off and they let him there. So it really seems that she was the natural choice to write something about the Statue of Liberty. So when she was approached, at first she sounded a little reluctant, saying, you know what, I'm a real artist. I don't write on commission. Fortunately, there was a lady who was both a friend of Lazarus and Bartholdi's, Mrs. Harrison, who approached her, and just imagine her approaching Lazarus and saying, Emma, cool down, swallow your pride. Huh. If you don't want to do it for yourself, think about your friends from Lithuania. Well, I don't know what happened, but that must have initiated a spark of inspiration, because overnight, on November the 3rd, 1883, Emma Lazarus wrote a sonnet as the Statue of Liberty, depicted as a modern colossus of Rhodes whose feet stand between two different cities, New York and Brooklyn. New York actually became New York City on January the 1st, 1898, so it was still a long time before that. And as she's standing in between these two cities, with a torch symbolizing the lightning imprisoned, a reference probably to electricity. She's addressing the countries of Europe, saying, you know what? You have everything. You have history, you have wealth, you have art, but somehow you don't like some of your people. You cast them at the very borders of society. And what are you going to do with them? You don't want them? Send them to me. I'm the mother of all the exiled. And I'm pretty sure that even if you are not that familiar with that poem, you surely heard the second part of it. As the statue cries with silent lips, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled muscles yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Send these, the homeless, tempest toast to me. I lift my lamp beside a golden door. Unfortunately, life for Emma is not going to be nice. Because briefly after writing this sonnet, she got sick. She traveled the world trying to, fix her conditions. But her health constantly deteriorated. She actually was born and raised in New York. She was living in Greenwich Village. Everybody can find Emma Lazarus' home at 14 West 10th Street in the very heart of Greenwich Village. So I would say less than 2 miles from Battery Park, where today you can easily take a look at the Statue of Liberty. But she never saw it. She was so sick that some days, she wasn't even able to get up from her bed. And actually, she died in 1887, the year after the statue was unveiled. Without saying it, she was only 38 years old. But after we will be back to Emma Lazarus. So let's get back to the Statue of Liberty. They have the money, they start to build the pedestal, and only one person died. A mason of Italian origins named Mario Longo, who died because a brick wall from Fort Wood, which provides a 2-story basis for the pedestal, fell on him. For the remaining weeks, nobody died, and nobody died even when assembling the statue. And the statue was assembled in very dangerous conditions. The frame was the first thing to be placed, and then people assembled the statue top down, literally seated on swings and hammering the 310 sheets of copper to the frame. 310 sheets of copper plus the head and the torch. Nobody died. A big American miracle, if you really think about it. The statue was unveiled on October 28, 1886. The day had been declared a holiday in New York, so a lot of people took part of a very big parade, which started at 5th Avenue and 57th Street, a stone's throw from Central Park all the way down to Battery Park. The rest is history, but let's get back to Emma Lazarus, because Emma's story is really worth to be remembered. So we heard about Emma Lazarus dying at 38 years old, never been able to see the Statue of Liberty. And her beautiful poem was forgotten after a while. And in 1903, one of her surviving friends decided that her memory needed to be honored, and she spent all of her remaining money into a bronze casting of Emma's poem, which was placed at a pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. Today, the pedestal is actually stones on the surface. But by the time it was soil, so it wasn't long before grass and bushes grew around it, hiding it from the people. And Emma was forgotten once again. She needed a miracle, and indeed that miracle occurred. In 1936, as people were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty, Many Americans, including journalists and photographers, went to Bedloe Island to pay tribute to this beautiful monument. And one of them, all of a sudden, while going around the statue, was somehow blinded by a reflection of light. But that reflection of light was not coming from the sky. It was coming from the ground. So he started wondering, what can this be? And somebody told him that they had heard that there was some bronze casting of a poem or something similar. So this man started to dig around and found it. And so he took all the grass and the weeds around it and took a picture of it. And the story says that this guy was a photographer working for a very, very famous magazine. So in a very few days, that picture went viral in today's terms, finally rendering Emma the credit she deserves. And some other sources actually say that this man was not simply an American citizen, a journalist, or a photographer. He was also one of the grandsons of the Jews from Lithuania who entered the United States, were admitted to the United States thanks to Emma Lazarus' intercessions. Be it as it may, this is one of the few rare examples where history is able to fix its own mistakes in surprising yet mysterious ways. Now, the Statue of Liberty is always there. Her torch never stopped shining, even on dark days, just like 9/11 or when Hurricane Sandy came to town. Remember these 2 days, because one of our following videos will be about this. For now, I thank you all for being here, and I think I'm right in saying that the story of the Statue of Liberty is a magnificent example of a story that started in not such an easy way, but turned out to be an awesome one. Okay? If you like, I will be seeing you again tomorrow, same time, for another story of the New York Decameron. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and have a very great rest of the day. Bye, friends.